Hi, Melissa. How are you today?
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thank you so much. And thank you for coming on the Bible Explained podcast. And of course, we're not doing a normal Bible Explained podcast episode. We're actually going to be doing a Saturday podcast episode with this because I was excited to hear about your story and get you on the podcast because you have a brand new book out, which is called Happy Lies. And I'd love for you to talk about that. But before we get started, this is a very important question. Coffee or tea?
Oh, coffee. 100%.
Yeah.
But though I can say that I drink both. But if I had to choose one to go without, it would be tea. I would definitely choose coffee every day.
Oh, yeah. I understand that completely. Unfortunately, I am a tea drinker now because coffee unsettles my stomach. So
yeah, that can be a thing.
Yeah.
I can understand that.
It's very unfortunate because my entire logo, if you look at it, it's a coffee cup with coffee in there. And so
yeah. Yeah. It can be the same thing though. It can be something where you're enjoying a hot cup of something.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. That's what I tell my listeners now. Just grab whatever your favorite beverage is and tune in with me.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to talk about your book, Happy Lies. And I have a copy of it right here. Mm-hmm. And I'll be honest with you. I'm not 100% through it already yet, but I am about halfway through and I love it so far. I think you are doing a really good job covering the topic of New Thought. And so the first thing I thought, when I heard about New Thought, I was like, I don't see how this is different than New Age. So I'd love for you to explain that. What is the difference between New Thought and New Age?
Yeah, this is the number one question I get asked. And there is indeed a difference. In fact, one of the people I had peer review both of I think it was the terminology chapter and the history chapter. His name is Carl Teichrieb, and he's brilliant. He wrote like a 500-page book. It's called Game of Gods. I actually leave his book as a recommendation. And his expertise is in these alternative spiritualities, and he studies them more than anybody I know. And he said something in this regard, because New Age is more physical. It's like things that you can see. Think of tarot cards, things that you can actually do in that regard. And I must apologize. The wind is a little aggressive. It's spring in New Mexico. So that's how it throws a little hissy fit out here.
I wish it was spring here, but.
Oh, yeah. I know. I can't even complain because I'm like, it seems the warm weather's coming. But yeah, the way he puts it is that it's very external. That's the word he used. It's external. So it's things that you can kind of do and see. Think of like crystals. Think of tarot cards. You have Reiki. You have the belief of reincarnation with karma, chakras, and then you have the alignment with the chakras and things like that. You have transcendental meditation, star seeds, light work, astrology, numerology, and these are things that would be considered more in the New Age bucket and are Eastern in origin. All right, that's very important. So think of like Hinduism, Buddhism, Eastern mysticism is really the genesis, if you will, of New Age, and then it's been westernized on a lot of fronts. And there are overlaps, by the way, which I do give specifics in the chapter because I've never met a New Ager who's not also a New Thoughter on some levels, but a New Thoughter would actually say, no, like we're not New Age, but they don't really necessarily think that they're New Thoughters either. There's some semantics there. But people that are in the New Thought movement, like that have written books about it, like there's one right here, and there's another holding up my microphone right now. They would say, no, we're not New Age. So for whatever that's worth. Now, to define New Thought a little bit more, instead of it being Eastern, it's more Gnostic in origin. It would come more from, it's ancient esoteric wisdom, all right? It's more internal, where New Age is more external, New Thought is more internal. It builds on this belief of idealism, which is just a fancy word for truth, on how to know truth. And idealism, basically, it says that the material world is a response to your mental world, that you can create your own reality through your mind. And your mind has like thought vibrations and frequencies that can affect the reality around you. And it's through your thoughts and words and your feelings. Those three things put together are very powerful, according to New Thought. Now, some words, some definitions that might be that are New Thought, not New Age. Some people think this is New Age, but New Thought, the practices and terms that are New Thought are manifestation, I am, affirmations. Affirmations are actually New Thought prayers. So when somebody in New Thought would consider praying, they don't pray to an external God. All right. You are actually affirming an inner, a truth that you are affirming. So for example, let's take sickness. This is a big thing because New Thought began with what's called the mind sciences, the mind cure movement, basically, which is where you heal yourself through your right thinking. And the idea is that you are affirming the truth that you're never broken. You're always whole. You are always perfect. And the concept in New Thought, there's this, called the law of correspondence, which basically says that in the material world, there's a correspondence, an equivalent to something in the spiritual realm. Okay. So literally everything, think even your thoughts, the words on a page, this camera, everything has a spiritual equivalent. So including your body. So if something's wrong with your body, you know it's perfect in the spiritual realm. So you bring it forth through your thoughts, words, and emotions. And so you're fixing the material realm, because remember what I said before about idealism. So in other words, affirmations are affirming what is true in that realm. And so when you say I am, you are that thing in which follows after what you say. So there's power in those words. So affirmations, manifestation, law of attraction is a New Thought belief. Let's see what else. There's so many things. You have even health and prosperity teachings. A lot of people look at the Word of Faith movement for that. I saw that first in New Thought, and I did my best to draw those lines back to New Thought of the connections of what was taught about health and prosperity, because New Thought believes that you should always be prosperous and you should always be healthy. And I'm trying to think of other terms. Like there's so many other terms. It's more like beliefs that go with it. But I think that this can give everybody kind of an idea. There's also this misuse of science as well. This is very important. I mentioned vibrations and frequencies before. It would be a very New Thought idea to say that there are vibrations and frequencies that are affected by you as a powerful spiritual being. And there's a lot of misuse of neuroscience and quantum mysticism and quantum mechanics. But here's the main difference between these two, okay? New Age would not consider itself Christian. New Thought does. New Thought considers itself metaphysical Christianity. It's made to look Christian and sound Christian. So people that are within this movement have a lot of terminologies that sound like the Bible. They'll use Bible verses.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, and they'll use terms. It'll have a metaphysical meaning. And another very big New Thought term is Christ consciousness. Christ consciousness. They look at Jesus and say, oh, he's a man who obtained the Christ, which is a metaphysical term for the divinity, the dormant divine spark within us all that you need to awaken to. And it's also, both of them can be, they dip from each other, but they come together with certain things like channeling, for example. A lot of occultic beliefs have to happen on both sides, but specifically with New Thought, what's very disturbing with that is that the founders would say that they have new revelation, new information from like Jesus himself that give, an expanded idea of what the Bible actually means. And it was a removal, a progression away from this Bible, this fundamentalist kind of view. They called it Calvinist sometimes. They always think that if you take the Bible plainly, then you're just like a Calvinist. And I'm like, no, it doesn't always work that way. Like, no, you can read the Bible plainly for what it says and just take it for what it is. They don't do that. It's a spiritual progression away from it, where New Age would not consider themselves Christian, but where they come together ultimately is that you are somehow divine. So I think that can be confusing for some people, where there's this really intense New Age perspective. And even when I got out of New Thought thinking it was New Age, and to be clear, I would have been maybe 30% New Age, 20% New Age, but I was mostly New Thought. I just thought it was the same thing. I thought any wiggity whack belief was in the New Age umbrella. But I immediately realized, wow, what I was in really looked Christian. And there's a lot of terms that people are asking me about that I do not understand, like sacred geometry, yoga, things like that. And I didn't even know what Reiki was. I had no idea I'm still learning about these things that are more New Age that I was never into and never heard of. But over here, I'm talking about people like Emmett Fox. Nobody knows who that is, but I read his stuff and I liked what he said, and I grew up with these kinds of beliefs. And so, yeah, it's kind of maybe a longer answer, but I do think it's very important to understand the difference between these two and that they're not the same.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I actually have a book here that I want to show you. This is off of my own bookshelf. This is, for those of you...
Yeah,
for those
Norman
of you
Vincent Peale.
Yeah, Norman Vincent Peale. This is the positive power of Jesus Christ, and this is on my bookshelf. And I've and I've actually read another book of his, which was The Power of Positive Thinking.
Positive thinking, yeah, that was a big one.
Yeah, and I read that one back in, I want to say 2018 or 2019, because I was raised IFB. For everybody that is listening knows that, and. When I got out of that whole mentality and mindset, I started looking for other things, and I happened to come across Norman Vincent Peale's book. But what's funny about that is after I read it, I was like, whoa, this is so powerful. I never heard anything like this before. And and I started trying to do some of those ideas, and what ended up happening was they didn't work for me.
That's your fault, Jenn.
Fun? I know. Yeah. So... They didn't work for me. And so, So tell me a little bit about that, because I want to hear about your background. How did you eventually get out of the New Thought movement? Because you were pretty heavily involved in it.
Yeah, well, first, that's interesting that you know about Norman Vincent Peale. That was like a name. We had multiple books on my shelf growing up, and I do remember that as well, just being fascinated with what he was saying about, I remember there's this little pamphlet, The Power of Positive Thinking, and it started with this story of a marriage falling apart. And this woman didn't want her marriage to end. And so she got into these concepts of the power of your mind, and she started envisioning and visualizing her husband being home every night at a certain time in his chair. And I'm paraphrasing. This is from a long time ago memory.
I remember this story, actually.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. And I remember basically the way that she put it is wow, one night he just was in his chair. And the next night and the next night, and ultimately it ended up being, it worked. This was something that she had manifested. And I just remember that story thinking, wow, that's so cool. But now in hindsight, I'm like, man, there's so many other factors that go along with this that I don't think anybody really considers, which we might get into later. But how I got into this, I didn't know what this was. I had no idea what this was until I understood what New Age was. And then there was this thing called New Thought, but I just thought it was basically New Age. But my family is very pivotal, and I have to always be very careful with this because I love my family, but it's kind of their fault. I grew up with these beliefs. We went to church growing up, but the way that Jesus was talked about was different. And the way that spirituality was talked about was that there's these other realms, there's these higher dimensions, if you will, that we can tap into as spiritual beings. And Jesus was this way shower. He was the way to show us how powerful we really were. If we could control our mind, if we could actually, I remember being told that if we could control all of our mind the way that Jesus did, then we'd be able to walk through walls. Then we'd be able to bend reality, literally, like a spoon, like the Phenomenon movie. We'd be able to do these powerful things with our mind, like Matrix stuff. And then But what got me was even at a young age, I was like, but nobody's doing that. Like nobody can, I don't know anybody who can walk through walls. I don't know anybody who can, right? And it was so confusing to me because I'm like, if that's the potential, then it's unreachable. So even at a young age, if that's the standard, we all miss it anyway. So there was always kind of this gospel presentation, ironically, that I kind of understood just by thinking about it. But it was my family. I have a lot of books that we had that were New Thought, old ones you can't find on Amazon. I'm looking at them right now, that were my great-great-grandparents. And they had a lot of information in them talking about Jesus. And it just sounded so ancient and so cool to me. And I didn't read too much of them. That was just my concept of who Jesus was. And then I became a Christian at 16, totally became a Christian at 16. My life was completely changed at that point, but I didn't have a lot of discipleship. And, it's funny, you mentioned Independent Baptist. That was the first church I went to. And it was not the worst experience. It wasn't the best, they didn't, wasn't really too open-minded about questions or me wanting to know about what would have been considered Christianity 101 stuff. But it wasn't just them. There was a general culture within Christianity, like, because I visited other churches, and it was just the impression I got was they didn't really want to think about their faith. And so I kind of felt like there was this anti-intellectual vein. And I know that was not the case. I think if I looked harder, I probably wouldn't have fallen back into, meshing together these metaphysical beliefs with my Christianity, which I didn't know that's what I was doing. I think that's really important. Didn't know there was a name for it. Just saw, oh, this is more open-minded and looks way more powerful. I thought it was just a higher, better version of Christianity. But fast forward from that, I got into a lot of stuff. It's not like it happened all at once. Over time, I started just kind of, adopting these beliefs, alternative beliefs that looked and sounded Christian. And some of it was within the church, right? So that was confusing to me as well, because, you have affirmations, you have power in your words, you have the power of your mind that ask, believe, receive, it seemed like, oh, the law of attraction is actually really Christian, like that's how it turned into for me. But I got out of it through some really strange turn of events, because it was two nice Jehovah's Witnesses that showed up at my door who ended up challenging what I believed. And I believe that all Christians, if you said that you were a Christian, that we all basically believe the same thing. But with them, it was different. I went to go research them, and it was in researching them that I realized, oh, if the Bible's true, they're wrong. But if the Bible's true, then I'm wrong too. And so it just I kind of leaned into that. And then I came across the serpent's lie. That really pulled the rug out from under me. This is such a cliche thing for Christians to understand. It's like a lot of Christians understand what that means when I say that. I did not. I had never heard of the serpent's lie, which is that you can be like God. This is literally the oldest lie told to mankind. And we have been self-exalting ourselves ever since. And it was then that I realized, oh, I fell for this. And there was some humility that had to happen there. And instead of kind of digging my heels in, I did the opposite. I repented, and I really wanted to know these answers. Like, okay, is the Bible true? Like, where did the Bible come from? Okay, if people are saying this about the Bible, that it was put together at the Council of Nicaea or whatever it was, then why? Like, what do they say? What does the opposition say? And so I started looking at these both sides. I had nothing to lose, right? What about hell? Hold on. They say it's an invention of the church. It's used to control, but hold on a second. If the Bible is true, then this is true, right? So I started doing this dance. I started kind of doing that, but it was really understanding that, but also like the resurrection of Jesus. That was very powerful. That was very powerful too, because I'm like, man, if Jesus rose again, everything's true. Everything is true. The Bible is true. And that was very interesting to research and study, because if Jesus rose again from the dead, which nobody's ever done, by the way, like there was actually a reason why he had to rise from the dead. It's, I am God. I am the one and only exclusive God. to be worshiped. We are not all the same. I am holy. I am separate from you. I can save you. I love you. And there is this that a lot of humanity has of A, believing a God outside of ourselves, and also B, looking at that God in worship. Like we want to worship ourselves. And I don't know of any other holy book quite like the Bible that explains that this is the fundamental problem of humanity, that we want to worship ourselves. And so that's kind of an exhortation, but also an explanation of how I got into this, what it is, and how I got out.
Yeah, and you mentioned that it was partially in the church as well. And so I kind of want you to go into that a little bit before we go, because I'm a little bit confused. What were you going to a church that was really New Thought-y? Or no? Okay. So can you explain that to me a little bit? So in what way does New Thought get integrated into the church nowadays? I'm really curious about that.
Yeah.
And also how big of a problem is it as well?
It's secular, right? New Thought is very secular, but it's also very Jesus sounding. So for example, I used affirmations before, because remember, New Thought is supposed to look Christian. Mm-hmm. And imagine for a second that there's a Christian at your church who is reading someone who is talking about the power of your words and the power of your mind and the power that you should never be sick, that you should never speak negatively, which is ironic. I shouldn't say it like that. They say always speak positively. Okay. I mean, everything you say and everything you think, because there's power in yourself, right? And there's this innate ability to be able to create. You are a co-creator with God. Everything I just said to you, I am in my mind pulling from a New Thought book. But these are things that we actually hear within the church, declaring and decreeing, right? This is chapter 8, by the way, in the Word of Faith movement. That's actually a fundamental argument that I make, is that the Word of Faith movement is tied in its historical origins to New Thought. Not explicitly. There are parts of Word of Faith that are orthodox, right? That they are biblical, but other parts are like, what's happening here? That's very unique to that movement. And after I came out of New Thought, I started wondering, why am I seeing like manifestation, law of attraction, same scriptures being transferred over, positive confession? Why am I seeing this? And so that's one aspect. And the other aspect is this overall attitude, I want to say belief of kind of how, like the positive thinking power, I want to say, where there's an element in Christian thinking where there really is power in your thoughts, that there's power in your thinking, that there's power in positivity. Let me take an example, Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich. Have you ever heard of that book? Mm-hmm. Okay. Napoleon Hill claimed to be a Christian, and so did Norman Vincent Peale. I think that's probably one of the best examples I can give you personally for how that gets into the church, because Christians are reading this material and they are implementing it in their spirituality because, hey, scriptures are being quoted. Hey, Jesus is being talked about. Oh, this must be Christian. Wow, this sounds really cool. You know what I mean? And so you feel, in other words, you feel power and you want that power. And it's in that wanting of power that we think, oh, this is God's plan for my life. And this is just a few examples. There's always more in the book of how I really get into this, but I would say that these are elements that are taken from New Thought, from even the cultural aspect of it, but because it's made to look Christian and because Christians are drawn to these books, especially self-help books. I have a whole chapter on the self-help movement, that the foundation for the self-help movement were New Thought authors, okay? And they took the power of New Thought and they applied prosperity to it, and not just sickness. It was more prosperity of how to be prosperous in life and how to make that happen for yourself. And then they put a Christian stamp on it. And so Christians are like, oh, look at this. This is Christian. This is okay for me to read. And then they sell millions and millions and millions of copies, and it goes out to millions and millions of Christians. And they read it and they implement it. And then they go sit next to you at church and they start talking about this. And you think, wow, this sounds Christian, but something's off. Okay, that's kind of the beginning to end of how that happens. And so it's not New Age, right? And that's the thing, is that it sounds Christian. So you don't know that it's what it is. Like you don't understand that the line being drawn back here, is something suspicious. And then you have progressive Christianity, which I have a whole chapter on that, because there's this overlap between progressive Christianity and New Thought, yet they are not the same. And everybody looks at progressive Christianity and they think, oh, it's the New Age. And I'm like, no, it's not. That's not New Age. What is that? Oh, it's New Thought, And so I'm trying to draw that line back as well. But I think that these things, kind of like the mystic aspect of New Thought in the way that it sounds Christian, I think that's really what gets us. Like I've had conversations with Christians who think the law of attraction is a Christian concept. They really believe that. They truly believe that is biblical.
And can you explain the law of attraction real quick?
The law of attraction is a belief that, in simple terms, your thoughts, emotions, and feelings mirror your reality, like attracts like. You are attracting to you. You are a divine magnet. So whatever you're thinking, speaking, and believing must, and they are so confident. They are so confident. It must manifest in your life if that is what you are thinking and believing and feeling. Emotions are so important. So this means that if you're judging something or someone, then that means you're bringing that judgment to yourself. If you are thinking and believing for a healing or for romance, healing, and money, those are the three things most people want, that if you believe that you are a millionaire, you feel like a millionaire, then you know what? God, the universe, must give that to you. And so that's kind of the really simplistic way. I have a whole chapter on the law of attraction, by the way. So I will, but again, the why behind it is very important. The reason why you are able to do that according to the law of attraction, which is ultimately an occultic belief, which is supposed to work, by the way. Occultic beliefs are supposed to work. God warns you against occultism, not because it doesn't work, but because it does. And you will go after other gods happily because it worked. So he's warning against that. Don't go after other gods. Don't mess with this stuff because it'll lead you away from me, the one true God. And the one true God, Yahweh, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, is not here to give us whatever we want. He is here to give us the life of prosperity under his terms. Okay, so that means that, and he even says it, Jesus says, to find yourself, you got to lose your life. Like you got to give. There's an element of submission that we don't want to do. We want the control. We don't want to give God the control. And I think a lot of that has to do with trauma, fear, in a lot of the interviews I did for this book, that I call it the pain point. A lot of these people believe what they do because they've had trauma, not because it's true. And it brings them some sort of peace that's not really peace. It gives them an idea of control because they don't want to give up that control. It's this vicious cycle. But the law of attraction, the reason why it works and the reason why any of this works is because it teaches you that you are God. You are divine. You can control and create just like God. He's giving you that power. It's really tricky. All right. And so you can have all these beliefs and all these things, but ultimately it leads to this deception that God has always warned us against.
Exactly. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing all that and for talking about your book. And so everybody should go pick up a copy of Melissa Dougherty's Happy Lies. We're laughing because I was trying to figure out how to pronounce her last name before we got started here. But yeah, Melissa Dougherty's Happy Lies, How a Movement You Probably Never Heard of Shaped Our Self-Obsessed World. And so if you're curious about anything regarding New Thought or New Age, definitely check out Melissa's YouTube channel. You have so much on it. I love going to your channel and researching about this. In fact, I use some of your content to write a lesson for the youth kids that I teach on Wednesday nights.
Wonderful. That's awesome.
So we really appreciate that.
Yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate you.
All right, Melissa, I will let you go. Happy listening, and God bless.